All right. Land installment contracts. Okay, so land installment contracts. When would you use a land installment contract?
You can't get a loan from the bank.
When you can't get a loan from the bank. When you own your own house and you want to sell it directly rather than getting the money all at once. And maybe you want to, for tax reasons, you may want to do a land installment contract. Now, today we don't have the whole thing about one-time capital exclusions for selling your house. But years ago, there used to be that one-time capital exclusion. So people would do land installment contracts so they wouldn't have to pay capital gains. So that's a reason today why. But primarily it is because somebody can't get a mortgage. So you as a homeowner own enough of your house that you can offer it on a land installment contract as a way to, as a carrot to help somebody buy your house, help you get your house sold. So that's why we have land installment contracts. So it's a legally enforceable agreement between a buyer and seller whereby the buyer promises to make periodic installment payments to the seller toward the purchase price of real property, and the seller promises to convey title to the property on receipt of the last installment. Now, periodic installments. Most of us assume periodic installments are going to be monthly installments. When people buy farms on land contracts, and that's where it happens more often these days on farms, farmers don't do monthly payments. Farmers do payments in the spring and the fall once every 6 months. So land installment contract, the periodic payment could be twice a year. It depends upon what the buyer and seller agree to. So you don't ever assume it's monthly. It's what everybody agrees to. There are title problems with doing this. On completion of all the terms of the contract, including payment of the last installment, the legal title passes to the buyer and the deed can be recorded in the buyer's name, but it only happens at the end of the contract. It's not like taking a mortgage today where the deed gets put in our name as the buyer right away. This only happens at the end when you make a last payment. When the contract is unrecorded and the seller encumbers or sells the property, the installment contract buyer may be without remedy. In other words, the person that owns the house can sell it again. And you're there making land installment contracts on it and you don't know that they've sold it out from under you, literally. It's hard to have protection because you're not recording anything because there's nothing to record because somebody else is holding title. The liens that attach before the creation of the installment contract may go unnoticed if the buyer fails to investigate the title beforehand. So when we buy on land installment contracts, very often the buyer is also not getting title work done. They're assuming they're going to be in the house for a period of 15, 20 years. They're going to make payments as it becomes theirs. They never assume that there could be title problems, so they don't get title work done. So what are we trying to tell you? If you work with a client buying a house on a land installment contract, do the title work up front. Do investigations up front. Make sure you're protecting your client and doing a thorough background check of what they're buying. After the acquired title, the seller does not have title at the time of entering into the contract, but subsequently acquires it. So they're giving it to the trustee to hold. It's typically a title company or attorney that'll hold this title contract and everything, trustee's deed, for this period of 15, 20, whatever years that you're going to do the contract. And then it comes back to the seller to sign over to the buyer at that last payment date.
Wait, can you say that one more time? Can you explain that one more time?
The seller transfers the deed to a trustee, and it stays in the trustee's hands, which is a title company or attorney, for a period of 15, 20 years while the land contract's being bought. So they don't have title to it either. They give it to a third
So
party.
who does that help?
Nobody. It's out there. It's just part of the transaction working. Part of how a land installment contract works. So the contract terms talk about the price. They talk about waste removal and inspection. In other words, no waste can be committed. The people have to take care of the house, that the house property can be inspected periodically. Indemnification, the act of compensating another in the event of the loss. So, who maintains the insurance on it? Is it the person trying to buy or the person that's selling is going to maintain the insurance? Who are named the insured? Who gets the benefits of the insurance proceeds if something happens to the house? That's all part of spelled out in this land installment contract. The assignment, how it happens, the mortgage, the conveyance, all of those are pieces of this land installment contract. The advantages, the buyer may not be able to secure financing from a lending institution, and this gives them the ability to purchase property with little or no money down. The seller, it helps them attract buyers. They can get a tax break, and they can have instance of legal ownership, so they can own it for a while longer. And on a land installment contract, if the buyer backs out, the seller just gets it back with the damages or whatever goes on over time. There's a guy, when I was in the trust department, he did a lot of investment in my little trust houses because he could buy a house and put 30 or 40,000 into it and clean it up and sell it, whether it was in Hartwell or Finneytown or where else, Pleasant Run, wherever, Pleasant Hill Ridge, wherever we had properties, he liked to buy them, and he did lease options. So he wasn't really doing land installment contracts, but what he was doing is people pay him a couple $1,000s. They didn't qualify for credit to buy a house under a regular mortgage. He would do these lease options, get a couple $1,000s. He had a perfect tenant in the house because they took care of the house like they were going to buy it. And if they walked away after 2 or 3 years, he basically kept all the money. They literally, if they walked away, he kept everything they did. He would restore it back again and bring somebody else back into the fold. So he was making money doing this. So he had legal ownership the whole time all this was going on. Same kind of thing happens with land installment contract. Until the final payment's made, the seller still owns the property. The disadvantages. If you're a buyer, the problems can be created by the death of the seller. So how does the buyer protect themselves with the death of the seller? They want to make sure that there's a will or some kind of designated something that says that this is a contract in effect. The unwillingness of the inability to transfer good title by a buyer can be a problem if the seller can't do it. The failure to record. These are often not recorded contracts. So record them. Make sure the world knows that you're doing this installment contract. The seller, the buyer default may result in forfeiture of all rights in the property with property reverting to the seller. So the seller may get a property back that they don't expect. They thought they sold it. All of a sudden they get it back. That could hurt them if they weren't planning on it or aware of it. And the cost of foreclosure. The seller has to become a foreclosure agent. They have to pay an attorney and go in and try to foreclose on property if things aren't working right. And very often they don't like to do that. They don't want to do that. Seller remedy would be forfeiture or foreclosure. The buyer remedy is specific performance. They can rescind the contract, they can sue for damages, or they can do foreclosure. And that is it. See, I told you it'd be a short chapter. Who pays the tax?